Hi everybody, I'm Dan Tratensek and we have almost made it through 2020, so hang on. We'd like to welcome you all to this second in the NHPA Strategic Webinar Series, and we'd like to start certainly by thanking our sponsors from Epicor for supporting this webinar series and with all they do for the industry. It is that time of year where we are going to talk to you about our 2020 market measure annual report. And we're going to share with you our thoughts on the year and some projections about where we think things might be headed in the near-term future, and talk to you about a bunch of other stuff as it relates to the industry. Again, this is the NHPA Strategic Series sponsored by Epicor, so I would encourage everybody. We have a whole host of webinars planned for 2021 in the Leadership Series, in the Strategic Series, in the Operations Series, and in the Product and Management Series. So make sure you take a look at our slate of webinars that we have planned for 2021. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Epicor. A lot of scary things have happened in 2020, but the next two things you're going to see are probably two of the scariest things that you might see in this webinar. Yes, that's me, Dan Tratensek. I am your Executive Vice President with the North American Hardware and Paint Association, and I will be leading off the presentation, but I am not alone. Today I have my oftentimes partner in crime, Mr. Jim Robisch, Senior Partner with the Farnsworth Group, who is going to be presenting along with me for the last 5 or 6 years. This same time of year, NRHA and now NHPA have been hosting our State of Independence Conference, and Jim and I have been kind of tag teaming this annual report every year since that conference started. Well, of all the things that have changed in 2020, that is certainly one of them. We obviously are not having a live State of Independence conference this year, but Jim and I still wanted to talk about what's going on in the industry and hopefully share some of our insights with all of you and try and make some sense out of what has been a particularly odd year for just about everyone. A little bit about what I am going to talk about before I pass it on to Mr. Robisch is I'm going to take a look at the story of 2020 and examine all of the external factors, wink, wink, you probably know which ones I'm talking about, that had an impact on the home improvement industry over the last 11 months. Then we're going to talk about NHPA's estimate for how the industry did and performed as a whole this year. And we're going to look a little bit at what some of our predictions are for where the industry is headed in 2021 and a little bit beyond that. We're going to talk about things like size of industry. We're going to talk about store counts and unit counts and kind of the way the industry breaks down. And lastly, we're going to talk in a little bit broader sense about the longer term outlook for the industry and some of those things, both empirical and a little bit less empirical, that are going to have an impact on the industry as we move forward. All of the numbers, I always like to talk about this as we're getting into kind of numbers talk. The numbers that we're talking about from NHPA that I'm going to be quoting throughout this come from a variety of sources. It would be easier if I could just make up the numbers and put them down, but we actually use backup data to come up with these numbers. And just some of the places that we use to form our opinions on size of industry, unit counts, and so on are things like NHPA's cost of doing business study, obviously the information that's put out by the U.S. Department of Commerce and Census Bureau reports. We look at wholesaler sales reports, direct research that we do with independent retailers, and a lot of that comes either through the surveys that a lot of you guys receive and respond to for us throughout the course of the year. But we also do a lot of research around our magazines, Hardware Retailing and Paint and Decorating Retailer, where we go out and a lot of you receive phone calls or surveys for that, and we get and draw information from that every year. And we also get information from obviously the publicly traded retail operations and other operations that service this industry that kind of help inform all of our numbers. So that's really our methodology behind where the numbers come from. When we're looking at things like market size reports, unit counts, and so on, what we're really looking at when we talk about size of industry and so on is sales for U.S. companies at retail and sales for both through the pro and consumer channels and sales for companies whose primary business is being involved with home improvement in some form or another, and sales through retailers who carry the core kind of home improvement categories. As I move on to talk about, away from just setting the stage with how we get to these numbers, as I talk about 2020 and where we are and how it's going to inform where we're headed, I simply cannot talk about it, just like no one could talk about 2020, without discussing the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And while COVID-19, and this is another disclaimer, and I've given a talk more specifically about COVID-19, which I would encourage you to check out through the NHPA.org website, yournhpa.org. And you can watch the entire webinar on COVID and its impact on the industry. But I always give this disclaimer that while we're talking about the impact that COVID has had on business, we certainly are not blind to the very human impact that COVID has had on all of us. As we're in the midst of the holiday season, for most of you, it probably has not looked like a typical holiday season, and obviously with good reason. And we're not ignoring that, but because the purpose we're here is to talk about business and business impacts, that's why we focus pretty strictly on the business ramifications of the pandemic. And when you talk about COVID and home improvement, of all the industries out there, COVID has definitely had an outsized impact on home improvement retail performance this year. And as I talk through this, I think you're going to see that we feel it's going to have an impact moving forward for the short term. And I want to go back just briefly to the beginning of the pandemic outbreak. As the year started out, up until really early March, it was pretty much business as usual for the industry. In fact, as we were tracking sales back then, and you look at some of the U.S. Census Bureau numbers on sales, the industry was tracking slightly above what it had in 2019. So January, February, and really most of March, the industry was tracking right along with about a 3 or 4% increase year over year, which was about what we had predicted in this report last year that we were going to see for the remainder of the year. And then, as we all know, it was early March when things changed. I still remember probably sitting with Jim down at the Oracle Market talking about, hey, did you hear there's a couple of cases of COVID that are now being tracked in the United States? And literally within 2 weeks, everything changed dramatically. And where it really first kind of was felt significantly in the home improvement industry was early March, when all of the wholesale markets started closing down. And I still remember going with our president and CEO, Bob Cutter, to a meeting in Chicago, and we stayed at the Hyatt McCormick Place. And it was literally like a ghost town. It was just the two of us in the hotel, and maybe some other people were there, but it certainly didn't seem like it. And that was when it really hit home for me that something is truly different about this. But that first initial kind of postponement and closures of markets really kind of signaled the wave of something bigger to come. And then within a matter of a couple weeks, NHPA, we had closed down our offices and gone to a work from home protocol. Communities across the United States were locking down, and it was a very critical time. And why I revisit this briefly is because something else very important happened back then. It was right around March 16th, mid-March, when John Hartman, who was then president and CEO of True Value, reached out to our president and CEO, Bob Cutter, and he said, man, we've got to try and marshal some efforts to make sure that home improvement retailers throughout North America are considered essential. Because everybody was seeing the writing on the wall, and there was, in a lot of communities, there was not a great degree of clarity about whether that was going to happen or not. And in a very short period of time, NRHA at the time really was able to rally all of these industry leaders together, and we created a joint letter that was signed off on by every president and CEO of every major wholesaler in the United States and Canada, and it was sent to all state officials, local officials, national officials. I know it was delivered to the vice president's office as he was running the COVID task force, and all the provincial officials in Canada, imploring them and making the argument for why home improvement retailers should be considered essential. And how much of a role that played in the ultimate decisions, we don't know. But we were happy to see, one, everybody representing the independent side of the industry rallied around this. And shortly after that, pretty much every community in the United States and Canada had home improvement retailers considered essential to the economy, and they were allowed to stay open. And the reason I really visit that is because that was the spark, if you will, of what has been since then an unprecedented year of sales performance we've seen in the home improvement industry. And were home improvement retailers not deemed essential or had to wait a couple months before that kind of designation came down, we could be looking at a very different profile in this industry than what we're looking at right now. So before we talk about the specifics and what this meant for sales within the industry, I want to talk a little bit about some of the immediate impacts that retailers saw as a result of this change in the way consumers are living their lives. One of the biggest things is that, and I'm going to try my best not to use kind of these hackneyed phrases like the new normal, but forgive me if I do, because in many ways it's really hard to describe some of what's going on without using those kind of phrases. But homeowners were in a new situation where the concept of home now took on an entirely different role, and it was overnight. That's the biggest thing that really drives home about everything we've seen. It's not like in the 90s when we saw this gradual yet steady increase in home improvement sales, or in the end of the aughts when we saw the housing market crash. There was a steep yet somewhat gradual decline in sales. This happened in a period of a few months. That not only did we see sales trajectory within the industry totally change, but we saw consumers really change their behaviors, and things like what role the home plays to them was completely different than it was 2 months earlier, and that persists, and that's one of the things we think is going to persist well beyond this. Not only did the pandemic amplify what we would call homeowners' nesting instincts. Anybody that's read about this nesting concept before, people kind of feathering their nests and investing in their homes, understands that when times are difficult, nesting tends to grow. Well, but here with the pandemic, not only were times difficult, but this nesting instinct was like on steroids, and consumers not only embraced their homes, but then there were all these projects that they had to conduct to make their homes more livable for the long term and under the pandemic. And then you combine with that the fact that there were limited options for other uses of disposable income. We had a magnifying glass on home improvement and home improvement projects, and consumers really getting into this new mindset. And during this whole time, retailers also in this industry had to figure out, how is this paradigm shifted, but how do we respond to these changing realities that we're facing at retail? How do we run an operation where we have to practice safe social distancing and enhanced cleaning procedures, and in many areas limit the number of customers in your store and service customers when they might not even be able to come into the store? So it was what would normally be years of trend and progress truncated into a period of maybe 6 weeks. So what were driving some of the early increases that we saw in home improvement? Well, when I've talked about this, I've kind of broke it down into 3 different groups of what we saw, this initial wave of reinvestment in home improvement that was kind of pandemic prompted coming about. One was this whole concept of work from home. A lot of people were having to figure out, how do I work from home? And that often required, let me go into that bedroom we haven't used in a while, or the den or whatever it was, and I'm gonna have to put a desk in there, computers in there, so I'm going to need cabling, I'm going to need storage boxes, and man, we haven't painted that place since our son moved away to college or whatever it was. So then it was, let's paint, and a lot of those projects to get ready for work from home revolved around home improvement. The second bucket that we put stuff in was just kind of this COVID-related stuff. A lot of people were really focused on, how do I make my home safer? So cleaning supplies, storage supplies, all those kind of things generated additional sales for home improvement. But the last one, and the one that's really persisted and we think will continue to have a persistent impact on the industry, is this concept of project catch-up. Is that now, I'm working from home, I'm not going away for that weekend vacation or that week-long vacation during the summer. I might as well spend some money catching up on the projects that I have at my home and making those investments when I'm not going to spend it on a cruise, a European vacation, season tickets. I might as well make those investments on my home. So really, home improvement has benefited from all of those consumer trends. Without making this a presentation about COVID, let's go ahead and move on to some of the results of what we've seen for 2020. And I really want to, as any good analyst or pseudo-economist such as myself might say, as you're looking at numbers, you always hedge your bets and say, you know, when we look at the numbers and we run the models and all that kind of stuff, it's all just a good guess. And that's the way most people who are giving these kind of presentations kind of hedge their bets and say, well, if I'm wrong, you know, we did our best. But the truth of the matter is, this year made it more difficult than in my 25 years of working on these kind of projects. It was more difficult to get our arms around what the industry looks like and is going to look like than it ever has been. And one of the biggest reasons for that is this was really a moving target all year long. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into some of the number specifics. Well, surprise, the first bullet point I have here is retailers have reported strong sales increases across almost every market in the US and Canada for home improvement. Our research that we did just past mid-year was showing that the typical increases for stores reporting increases in sales was about 24.2% for independent home improvement retailers. And I'll tell you, we're involved with and in touch with big retailer groups, and we talk to retailers all the time. And we were probably talking to retailers more frequently as all this was going on, because everybody wanted to know, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are other retailers saying? So all the research we did, all the anecdotal conversations we have, every month from April on, I can tell you that independent retailers, who typically are a relatively conservative bunch when it comes to projecting where they're going to be in terms of sales, we're consistently saying, well, I think April's really strong, but I think things are going to fall off in May. Then in May, they were saying, well, it's been really strong, but I think that ride's going to end come summertime. All the way up until we came into the fourth quarter. And we just never saw that tail off. It just consistently, month after month, we were saying same kind of growth. And there was a little swoon in there, but it was really just that, a little swoon that we saw. Our research that we did with independent retailers, where we talked to close to 700 different storefronts about how their business was doing throughout the year, so a pretty broad sample. 87.2% of the retailers we talked to said that they were reporting sales growth over 2019, and the average increases, as I said a little bit earlier, was about 24.2%. When we factored in the retailers who had not experienced the same kind of growth, or you blend in some of the stuff kind of from the pro side and so on, we saw growth about just after mid-year coming in for the industry at about 19.4%. And at that time, this was about mid-year, everybody was questioning. I still remember specific conversations I was having with retailers that said, well, I'm budgeting things to fall off the table in Q3. Well, here we are, Q3 has passed, and most of you have probably seen some of the corporate reports that came out in Q3, all of which were representing the same kind of sales growth. So before I dive into kind of the overall numbers, let's talk a little bit about kind of the outlook. We also asked retailers in a research series that we were doing, after we kind of start talking about performance, as we began kind of going into middle of Q3, we had a lot of retailers asking us, I have no idea how to budget. Do you know how other retailers are budgeting for next year? And again, at the time, there was the same chorus of retailers that would say, well, I'm budgeting things to fall off that table. And quite honestly, I didn't have a better answer. So what we did, like we normally do at NHPA, is we said, let's go out and ask a bunch of retailers what they're thinking. So we sent out surveys and this time it was about the same kind of response size, asking retailers, how are you going to budget for sales for 2021? And all of this kind of comes into play as we're trying to figure out our industry-wide numbers. Well, when we sent out this survey, about 41% of the retailers we talked to said that they're going to budget for sales decreases in 2021 over 2020. About 40%, so just pretty much the same, said they're going to budget for sales to be flat from 2020, and an intrepid group of about 19% said, no, we think that this trend is going to continue, and we're going to be able to take advantage of 2021 sales to the same degree. Of those budgeting down for 2021, the average percentage that they were going to budget down from 2020 was 15.8% of sales. We asked, okay, well, if you're going to budget down almost 16% from actual, what are the things driving? Why do you think you're going to budget down? And the majority of people just said that, one of the biggest factors weighing into that is that we just think next year these sales increases that we've seen are going to fall off. And that was about 87% of the folks we talked to. About 70% of them, and they could list multiple reasons, about 70% of them said that one of the big things that we have, and it's also been a concern for even being a headwind to sales this year, is whether the issues with the supply chain are going to loosen up. Because as we all know throughout the industry, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer, the supply chain has proven for a variety of issues to be a challenge. And retailers are getting to the point where they're now saying, I'm worried about 2021 if we can't find ways to improve the supply chain. And then about the same amount, 70%, also said, listen, I'm just concerned not only with COVID's impact, but I'm also concerned just about the general direction of the economy and what that's going to look like in 2021. And for all those reasons, they were budgeting down. For those who were budgeting up for 2021, the average amount they were going to budget up was about 10.7%. And I think there's a couple things driving that. One, not everybody felt the increases this year at the same time. Certainly if they were more pro-focused, it was a little bit slower, more gradual increase. But all of our information, and I'll talk about this in a minute, seems to suggest that pro might grow a little bit as pent-up projects begin to really kind of surface in 2021. So that's where we think some of these retailers hedging for growth in 2021 are coming from. But when we ask them, where do you think those product sales increases are going to come from in 2021? The biggest leading thing, which I think is really interesting, is 56.3% of them said, we think we're going to drive growth by adding product lines and products to our assortments that are going to help us drive sales. And I think that's pretty logical when you think about it, is because there's been a windfall in sales throughout this industry. But right now, to be honest, folks, retailers are so busy, they haven't been able to make a lot of investment out of this additional revenue that's come in. And I think they're really looking at, when we move into 2021 and things normalize a little bit, we think we could use some of that windfall to add products and lines to our business that are going to help us grow. 53% said that they expect sales increases to continue just as they have continued in 2020 to continue throughout 2021. And then about 40% said that we think the economy is going to support stronger sales. So if there's anything that really kind of underscores some of the split opinions that we see in the United States right now, is that 50% think the economy is going to get softened and sales are going to go down, 40% think the economy is going to strengthen and sales are going to go up. So that certainly kind of underscores some of the dynamic we have right now. So what does this all mean in terms of looking at the industry? Well, as we were looking at these numbers, and again, I preface this by every year when we do our numbers, because I'm talking to you here and we're recording this at the beginning of December, so the numbers we were looking at 2 months ago when we were putting these reports together were really, all the way through mid-year, and some feedback that we were getting from Q3, but not complete Q3 numbers. What we had predicted at that point in time, as we were looking at the numbers, that this year would see about 12.4% growth overall for the industry, taking all overall industry sales to about $457 billion, which is about a $50 billion increase over sales from 2019. Our prediction for next year, and NHPA, we tend to also be conservative in our estimates, is we think that the market is going to soften a little bit, probably at the end of Q3 and Q4 of next year, but that's going to hold it relatively flat with what we saw in 2020, but we're predicting a downtick for industry sales in 2021 of about 0.7%, so just under 1%. But then we're seeing in 2022 and 2023 and moving forward that we're going to return to a more normal high threes, low fours year-over-year growth, which is going to create a compound annual growth rate from 2019 to 2024 of about 4.6%. So healthier than we had predicted, primarily driven by what we've seen. But I also think it's important to remember, even those retailers that are predicting 2021 sales to be softer and saying that I'm going to budget down by about 16%, If you say they're going to budget down by 16% over 2020 sales, that would still be pretty healthy growth over what they were posting in 2019, and it would still show an upward trend line. So again, even if we do see a 16% dip for some retailers next year, and other retailers are predicting better growth, it's still going to be flat, but flat against that new number that 2020 created. So it's flat against a higher number. What we also like to do is share numbers from other organizations, so it's not just kind of us out there. We try and illustrate what other people are thinking, and Jim, who's with the Farnsworth group, one of the organizations they're involved with, it's the Home Improvement Research Institute, and they work with IHS Global on their projections and size of industry reports, and they're kind of in the same situation we were, and when they looked at the numbers, they were thinking that the sales in the industry will have increased by about 8.7% to about $440 billion. And they're a little bit more confident that next year, and again, if you look at some of their reports driven a lot by that kind of pent-up demand growing, we're going to see about a 1.5% increase in 2021 over 2020. And you track out their growth moving forward, they're a little stronger on growth in 2022, but they're still in that kind of 4 range. And then when you look at the compound annual growth rate that they're projecting 2019 to 2024, it's real similar to ours. They're at about 4.7% growth. And then when we look back and look at the numbers that we get from the U.S. Census Department, obviously they're only tracking real-time data. And when you look at the growth rate going throughout the years, if you look at that kind of curve from 2014 to 2019, you're going to see growth around that mid to high 4 range. If you look at the U.S. Census Department non-seasonally adjusted numbers through mid-year, and I think they were through August when we were had projections for August when we looked at our numbers. They were a little bit softer. I think they were at about 12.3% that they were reporting in actual real-time results for the industry at the time. Now that we've looked at industry performance, and finally, to kind of wrap up this industry performance, I do want to point out once again, because as I started this discussion saying that this was one of the most difficult years to get our arms around, one of the reasons is because we were in the same boat at NHPA, looking at every quarter, listening to retailers and saying, yeah, we think things are going to soften, we think things are going to soften. And after we completed this, when Q3 numbers came out from ACE and came out from Do It Best and came out from Home Depot and Lowe's, it's easy to see that a lot of the momentum continued into Q3. Every year when we prepare this report, we look back at the previous year and we adjust our numbers. Usually it's adjusting, less than 0.1% or by a few tenths of a percent. This year, I honestly think as we finish, and we got the Q3 numbers, and if we finish with a strong Q4, we might have to adjust our size of industry numbers relatively considerably as we look back at them. So I would be prepared for that, but I could say again, in my 25 years, I don't think I've at any point seen this kind of rapid escalation in sales. So buckle in, because all those same factors could also really quickly change what we're seeing in 2021. Let's move on to something that's a little bit more concrete, and that is individual store performance. And the numbers that I'm going to talk about for store performance come from NHPA's cost of doing business study. And unless I otherwise talk about it, all of these numbers they're actual retail numbers, and they come from actual retailers who give us their income statements and balance sheets. These numbers are based on 2019 performance, and unless otherwise noted, they don't represent the same store group, so it's a different store group every year with some exceptions. And the study, again, is used to spot trends that we are seeing. And some of those trends, up through 2019 were important to watch, so it's going to be really interesting to see how 2020 might have changed all this. Real quick, when we talk about hardware stores, home centers, and lumber dealers, hardware stores, we're talking about stores whose primary business is to sell hardware and home improvement items. They carry all the core categories. They carry very little in the way of lumber and building materials, but there's no size limitation to what we look at as hardware stores. You could have a 30,000 square foot hardware store. You could have a 4,000 square foot hardware store if they meet those other criteria. Home centers are typically what we would kind of define as a hybrid between a hardware store and a lumber dealer. They have to have a minimum of 10,000 square feet under roof sales. They have to carry a full assortment of hard lines from all the core categories, but they also have to offer LBM to meet our definition of a home center. And for our size of market numbers and the numbers we quote outside of the cost of doing business, big boxes are part of this home center area. Lumber dealers, these could be chain, these could be independent. They have to allow consumer traffic for our cost of doing business study. They have to have an under roof selling area that is smaller than 10,000 square feet, or else they get pushed into the home center category. And obviously a significant portion of their sales have to be derived from lumber and building materials, but they obviously also carry other categories. So the first part, where the numbers do include the big boxes, when we look at contributions to the overall industry sales by store type, the trend that we see going forward is, as you can see, in 2019, hardware stores contribute about $51.6 billion to the industry total. Home centers 253.3, which includes the big box numbers, and lumber yards about 101.7. You can see how that tracks forwards, where hardware stores and home centers saw a pretty big increase this year, while lumber yards actually saw some declines. But we see that kind of reversing as we move forward, as kind of some of those projects begin to pick up. Unit count, we get a lot of questions about unit count in the industry, and this is where a lot of our research comes into play, where we actually go out there and we seek all those storefronts out in the industry through a lot of our research. And you could see that what 2020 did was really, with the strong business, particularly amongst the hardware stores, I think a lot of people who might have been thinking about selling their stores, consolidating their business, said, you know what, I'm going to ride this out for 2020 and see what happens. We think in 2021, though, we're still seeing that gradual decline in store count really throughout all categories in the industry, and we really think that's going to continue at the rate of about 1% a year. It's definitely a trend that we see fewer owners owning more stores, but we also see, because of the succession issues and a lot of other issues, we do see store count continue to decline. The top chains as a percentage of the overall sales in the industry, you could see it's kind of been an interesting, over the last 3 years, it's been an interesting dynamic with top chains. They were at 51.9% of total industry sales. That climbed to 52.5 in 2018, and 2019 dropped down to 51.3. And we definitely think that the independent segment of the market is going to gain a little bit of market share in 2020. And the percentage of units, top chains, again, they were about 17.7% in 2017. That climbed a little bit and then went down in 2019. So how are hardware stores, by our classification, performing internally? What are the metrics, the key performance indicators that we're seeing? And again, this tracks back to 2019 performance, because of course we don't have full year 2020 data to share. But what we saw was in 2019, the typical hardware store posted profits before taxes of about 4%, net profits before taxes. And this was the third highest net profit before taxes that the typical independent hardware store had posted. And high profit stores saw this figure reach 8.5%, which was a slight decline over 2018, but still more than twice the performance that you're seeing out of the average store. We also saw that comparable stores, and when I say comparable stores, means the stores that participated in the 2018 study and the 2019 study, they saw sales increase by 4.1% from 2018 to 2019, but they also saw customer count drop by 2.3%, and sales per customer fall by about 600 or by 0.6%. 2019 total payroll as a percentage of overall sales at a typical store hit 22.5%, its highest level ever. And this is the reason I picked these data to track, and we're going to kind of track them across the store types, is because employee costs and payroll costs are one of the major concerns moving forward. So it's something we really want to watch closely as wages are typically seeing inflationary pressures. It's also one way that high-profit hardware stores are really able to create a difference. And when you see that the typical store had payroll as a percentage of sales about 22.5%, high-profit stores were able to better control that metric at about 20.3%. Comparable home centers in our study, so those same centers that participated in the two, saw sales increase about 2% in 2019, but 30% of the stores overall saw sales decline. So what we saw was a smaller group of same stores that saw bigger increases, and that 30% that saw a decline kind of pulled that number down to 2%. High profit stores, high profit home centers, the profit before taxes was 5.6% compared to 2.1%. So similar to hardware stores, it's more than double. High profit home centers are able to generate more than double the net profit before taxes of the typical stores in the industry. And one of the ways they were able to do that is high profit stores saw more than 12,000 additional customers in 2019 as opposed to the typical store. And sales per customer at these high profit home centers were almost double what they were at a typical store, $69 per customer versus $37. Even with lower sales, typical home centers saw payroll as a percent of sales come in at 19.3% in 2019. But again, consistently, the high profit performers were better able to control that number, and they only came in at 16.3%. Lumber dealers that were comparable study to study in 2019, they actually saw their sales fall by 2.6% in 2019, with 53% of the respondents reporting a drop in sales, and that's the same year-to-year respondents. The typical outlet, lumber outlet, saw a net profit before taxes of about 2.5%, which was down for the third straight year, which is a concerning trend, but for all the reasons we've talked about, we think that there's going to be a reversal in that trend in 2020 and as we go forward. Where high profit lumber dealers, again, it's pretty consistent, more than twice the average number of net earnings per store at 6.0% of sales that they're able to keep as net profits. The typical lumber dealers saw 2,600, just over 2,600, or 26,517 customers in 2019, which is the lowest customer count they had reported in more than a decade. Whereas the high profit stores were almost able to double that with a customer count of 40,419 average visits. So real quick, I'll wrap up with what's next. Just to put it, and we've talked about it, empirical evidence, and I know our friends at the Farnsworth group have a lot of evidence, some folks at the group Consumer Specialists have a lot of evidence, and other organizations out there have a lot of evidence that does not indicate that there's any imminent slowdown in home improvement, particularly as a result of what we're seeing from COVID-19. And imminent, I mean probably within the next 2 to 3 quarters, and some people are saying they don't see anything slowing down for over the next couple of years. Just one statistic that I wanted to share from some of the Farnsworth group data. I'm stealing all Jim's material here. 68% of homeowners in their recent COVID-19 impact tracker study indicated that they had started a new project in the last month. And 70% said that the onset of COVID-19 had caused them to start those projects. That's about all I have, folks. I think that there are some great opportunities out there for independent retailers, really understanding and adapting their operations to embrace these new changes that they're seeing from customers. I think in 2021, things like e-commerce, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, all of those things are gonna be much talked about and really take the forefront position for retailers as they try to continue to earn customers' business. Retailers in this industry have had a windfall this year in terms of sales and ultimately profits that they're going to be looking to invest in growth, and so they need the industry's support to do that. There are still so many things that are big question marks out there. What's going to happen with COVID-19? It sounds like we're on the cusp of a vaccine. How long is that going to take to return to more normal? When things do return to normal, what is that going to mean to disposable income and how that relates to home improvement? Well, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be happy to share the data with you, but right now we don't know. But like most people who look at economics or do analysis for a living, we're giving you our best guess. And we think that business is going to remain pretty strong through 2021, at least somewhere around the 2020 levels, which is going to be good for home improvement across the board. That's about all I have. I'd like to now throw it over to my partner in crime, Jim Robisch.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's always a pleasure to be part of NHPA's seminar series, virtual or not. We've been talking, we miss the camaraderie, mostly in the bars, I think, is what we miss, but we still want to get the information out, and that's why we're here. And as Dan said, we've been doing this for about 5 years to try and keep everybody abreast of what's going on close to the end of the year. I do want to make clear to everyone that when Dan calls me his partner in crime, we have never actually been committed of a crime. So a lot of people probably have seen us around. What can I say? So, no, it is a pleasure, and just to dovetail on what some of Dan said, was it's been an interesting year for sure. And typically what I would do in these is show an awful lot of data. I think two things about the data this year. One, Dan did an exceptional job of kind of summing up some of the numbers, and to make sure everybody stays awake. I'll be less on that than maybe I usually would be, and maybe a little bit more on perspective. And the first perspective I want to share, and it's a quote by Marcus Aurelius, and I don't know if you know who that was, but he was a Caesar, and probably the biggest reason you'd know who he was in the movie Gladiator, and he was the dad that supposedly Russell Crowe killed, but he says, how ridiculous and unrealistic is the man who's astonished at anything that happens in life. And I think that's so appropriate today, because who would have ever thought, and should we really be astonished? 2020 has had just about every type of calamity, interesting event that we've seen in the last 50 years. So let's not get excited about it, and let's move on. And that's why we're here. One of the things I want to do is, as we always want to do, is present information that allows you to be thinking about 2021, planning for your future, but more important, planning to grow in your future. And while it's fortunate that we had these windfall of sales this year, a lot of people, I think, have become a little bit lax on what do I do, how do I plan to grow in the next year. So the information I'm going to present will be to get us to a point when I'm done that these are key things you want to think about. And I'm going to provide a lot of perspective. Dan talks to a lot of people, but I'm talking to people, and we're doing local market studies, which I think adds a lot of flavor and detail to the general studies that are going on, because these are people that might be up 75%, and you're asking why, and then you've got another one that says, well, my business is only up 20%. Why? There's a big wide gap between a lot of them, and we'll attempt to get at that. So what about 2020? Definitely a year to remember. I know I'll remember it. The last time I was on a plane was flying home from the Orgill market where Dan and I were. Who would have thought it, right? But it's not really something I miss that much, I must say. But the key thing is that COVID-19, it created really unanticipated opportunities, first of all. And I want to stress that, because so many people say, oh, I had these challenges. Well, I don't know, it was Lou Holtz maybe that says, every challenge is an opportunity. And I think we are in a position to take advantage of that. We're, as Dan alluded to too, certainly being deemed essential was part of that. We had our stores open, we were a place to go. Between hardware stores and the liquor stores, what a great time to be stuck at home, right? But in 2020, customers, they basically changed overnight. It wasn't like we had a big warning on this. It was like as it rolled across the country, it was one day you're in the office and the next day they're putting signs up and saying the office is closed, get home. Okay. So the big thing is how customers are shopping, where they shop, and how they purchase have all changed. And there certainly were signals of this going on pre-pandemic. In fact, I wrote an article for Hardware Retailing about that in the December issue. But the key thing is they have changed. And out of change, again, comes opportunities. Dealers have had to and will have to reevaluate how they go to market. And that's what I want to talk about today, is the market. And what do they have to do? How do they have to go to the market? You got to rethink about strategies for the future. For many independent retailers, it means they finally have to think about strategy planning in a serious context. Not that they didn't do planning before, but I mean, there's some big changes going on. And I hear people complain about, oh, I got to buy all this plexiglass. That's the least of your problems, or least of your challenges. You got to rethink your strategies. The thing is, I think now more than ever before, and Dan said he's been around 25 years. I've been around a few more. I won't go into that. I will say you've got 75 years of experience of the two mounds of round sound. The key thing is, if you don't adapt, if you don't change the way you go after this market today, the consequences are just going to be more significant than ever before, because they really, really have changed. So about planning your strategy, these changes we're going to talk about have and will continue to redefine how you plan your company's strategy. We always say strategy isn't that difficult once you have accurate information. And accurate information a lot of times isn't sitting around with your team saying, what do you think? What do you think? The tribal mentality has no place in today's strategy planning, especially since we're sitting in the middle of a pandemic that has forever altered a lot of shopping behavior and preferences. So again, we're going to cover information today that help you understand what's happening in the market, where we're headed in the future, so you can plan your strategy that much better. So let's talk about the market. Couple things. I want to talk about market dynamics first. That's one thing I think is important. The way that we tend to look at things as analysts and consultants is, okay, get all the emotion out of it. What is the market? What are the numbers? What's the market really saying? And then look at how the customers are changing. And I won't spend a lot of time on changing customers because everybody knows people are buying online. I can't wait to get more Christmas numbers. I thought last weekend, the holiday shopping weekend for Thanksgiving, was amazing at how many people, one, were in stores, but more importantly, how many people were going online. But I think one of the other things is, don't get caught up in the media. If you get caught up in that, beneath those headlines, just remember, there's a strong and opportunistic market. It's not all bad news. Fundamentals are big. The things I look at, whether that be good or bad or whatever, employment. There is recovering employment. Now we're seeing some shutdowns, so this is going to be moving back and forth, it would appear, but certainly it's hovering around that 10% rate, down from 18 to 20 if we go back to April, I think. So when people are employed, they've got money, they can't go out to spend it, they can't get on planes, they can't get on cruise ships, they can't go to hotels or resorts. That is good. There's a tremendous savings rate in our country. That is good. There is stable consumer confidence. If anyone had told me in April that consumer confidence would recover to where it was in September, now it's slacked off just a little bit from that, I would have thought they were crazy, but it isn't. And when a consumer is confident, what do? Why do we call them consumer? Well, because we're a consumption-based economy. When they have money, they want to spend it. We love to spend money. We love to shop in this United States of America. We also have strong builder and remodeler confidence. A couple things enter into why this is a solid market fundamental. First of all, what happens when somebody moves into a new home from an existing home? They fix up the existing home to get rid of it. Then the inspector comes in, they got to fix it up more. Then they have to go pay for the house they just built and probably do a lot of improvements to that to make it, their domain. And then the person that buys their house has to come in and fix it up to suit their life and lifestyle. So, we call it the double, triple whammy, if you will. And builders are really confident. We know there was all kinds of shortages of product for building. We have a short supply of homes that needs to be gapped. But remodelers are really confident too. And I think for those of you who deal with the pros on an ongoing basis, who has ever talked to a real confident builder? I mean, ever hear anything good out of them, your customer? Next, there's the low interest rates. And the Fed's committed to keeping the rates low. Why is this a solid fundamental? It opens up the opportunity for people from heretofore could not maybe afford to purchase a home, have their own occupied dwelling, owner-occupied dwelling, moving out of an apartment, but they can now. That combined with the fact that they can't spend a lot because they're not going out shopping, they're stuck at home, and they're still employed because they're working from home. These low interest rates speak very, very well to really good growth in both building and remodeling. One of the things that the low interest rates are doing is it's bringing in a new generation of homeowners that are entering the housing market. And it's driving this new home construction and remodeling as well. Go back to the three things I mentioned before. Now we have people who we never thought would be able to buy homes. I still have to laugh for years when, millennials aren't going to buy homes. They don't want to buy homes. They want to live in rentals and they want to live downtown. Guess what? They want space. They're not going to have kids. Guess what? They have kids. They also had one dog, now they got three. So they're looking for space. That in itself is driving an awful lot of where these new generations are going and looking for homes. And compared to where we were this time last year, it doesn't look like some of the big cities and the inner cities are the places they want to live. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Red hot stock market. I was listening to Stu Varney on Varney and Company in the morning the other morning, and he always has this line, and he says, "Oh, it's a rally. Check your 401ks." Well, have you checked yours lately? It's amazing. The stock market is at record highs. The thing is, too, in 2021, all the, quote, experts, and I'm certainly not a stock market expert, or I'd be sitting on an island right now because it's cold here in Indy. They're saying that 2021 is going to be great and that the Dow is going to continue to rise. The S&P is going to go higher than it is now. That's amazing because people are actually getting wealthy by not really doing much except watching their investments grow. I think there's expected strong Christmas sales. I think that's solid. People are going to want to have a release from not being able to consume all the things that make them happy. I watch TV only because it's there, and every commercial, buy online, come get it. I think we're going to have really strong Christmas sales. Maybe not at the brick and mortar level that a lot of people would like to see because people are very, very cautious about where they shop, but they still want to have Christmas. And then last and maybe most importantly, we've had positive vaccine results. I think we've got 3 now that have a 90+% effective rate. They're supposed to have some available the end of this month. We'll see how that goes. I think the rollout plan may be optimistic a little bit, but it's still going to be rolled out. I think May, June is going to be a good time frame. Guess what happens in May and June? That's one of the hottest seasons for hardware and home improvement. People feel safe to go out. So I think there's a lot of solid market fundamentals that people either forget about or ignore, either by design or by default. So it looks good. The other thing is business is good. Now, business isn't just good, it's darn good. It's so good that once again, we've got a lot of independent dealers thinking, man, I'm up 25%. Look at how great of a retailer I am. Now, the vast majority realize that this windfall's, just by being in the right place at the right time and certainly being essential, but they're reporting record sales increases. And as Dan pointed out from their study, they expect these increases to continue in 2021. So that's solid. Online sales have skyrocketed, and that's the only way to describe it. And I like to say, I told you so, and I'll tell you again, I told you so. We have been, Dan and NHPA and kind of everybody else that talks to you on an ongoing basis has tried to push the independent into understanding how important online sales are going to be. And how many of you sat back and said, well, I could have and didn't, I should have and didn't, and now you're not getting the benefits of online sales because you still haven't committed to or executed some type of at least minimally functional e-commerce platform. And they're available. There's people out there to help you. I'm not sure why you're not, but you need to be looking at that because an awful lot of the sales, especially when you look at the billions of dollars that Depot and Lowe's have invested in their e-commerce capabilities, this is just going to continue. What's happening with this windfall? Well, dealers are investing in their businesses. Dan made an excellent point. So many of them are like, I'm so busy playing catch up, trying to keep up with the business I have now, that I don't have time to think about investing in my business. Well, a lot of them are, but even those that are real busy are still looking at updating and adding equipment. Great time to do that. Sharing with team members. This year, I've talked to an awful lot of our good clients, and they're calling it war pay. They're calling it, casualty bucks or whatever it is. They're sharing the bucks, and it's good for a couple of reasons. One is to keep the people coming in, but two, it allows them to do it at a time when the team realizes, hey, I'm not doing this just for myself. They're not doing it just for themselves. They're doing it for us too. They are investing in information technology. They have to. And again, we like to think we deal mostly with high-performance retailers, but they're certainly doing that. Dan alluded to expanding product offering. Great time taking these windfall profits from these sales and reinvesting them into new product categories. Certainly the safety products are one type of product, but how many dealers are sitting there going, well, gosh, I think I could get into this, or I could get into that and get by with that. And then, believe it or not, exploring new locations and certainly acquisitions. You can't get one of the newsletters without seeing so-and-so acquired this, they're getting bigger. And it's not just the nationals, okay? How many of the smaller companies or regional companies are growing through acquisition, and they're doing it now because they've got the cash and they've got the low interest rates, or they can find an investment partner to go along with them because our business is strong. The investment community isn't going to support acquisitions unless they think the business is going to be good. And it's good now, and they're saying it's going to be good and continuing. Another one, I'll just comment briefly on this. I find it intriguing. I may not be objective here because I'm not a downtown person. I live out in the country. There's some of those of you out there that would say, thank God that you do. But there's a perfect storm of factors that are fueling this exodus from the cities. And what are they doing? They're creating a major opportunity in the suburbs because they're going primarily from rentals, condos, into single-family homes, maybe multi-family homes, but for the same reasons. There's civil unrest. There's certainly health concerns. They want lower cost, lower density areas. And again, we've got low interest rates. They need more space, maybe better education options, And this really, again, is fueling, I think, a lot of this active millennial and other new buyers, because people are, I mean, what were they saying 3 months ago? You can't get a rental truck in New York City. U-Haul was shipping equipment in from other cities nearby just to handle the overload. And the cost to do a one-way had tripled or something. So that is a major factor that's taking place. So the exodus is providing opportunities, again, for hardware and home improvement dealers. Why? Because when they move in someplace, they're either building it, or when they move in, they're going to fix it up because they're going to make it livable for them. Okay, let's talk about the consumer market. And this is a little more data intensive, and I apologize for that, and maybe some of you have seen this because we've been talking about this for the last couple of months. And first place to start is where DIYers or consumers are making their last purchases. And we broke it out by generations. A lot of things have happened, especially when people were saying Gen Z and Gen Y aren't going to be doing home improvement. Well, that's not true. But there's a couple things about this. First of all, the really strong position of what I'll call our primary channels. And if you look at home centers, it's really strong across all of the generations. But if you look at hardware stores, it's consistently strong among the matures, boomers, Xers. But what we're seeing here is that Z and Y, they're really looking at alternative sources of buying our products, and one of the biggest is online-only retailer. So what's that telling you? Certainly they're shopping home centers, certainly they're shopping our hardware stores, but we've got to have a response to that. And it goes back to, we've been telling you, you need to get online with online sales, because these are the generations that are going to be your customers or best customers in 5 to 10 years. And if you're not in the game, you won't be in the game. Okay? If we look at it by channel purchase incidents across male or female, certainly male and females like the home centers. What this also tells us is that they're really still looking at the stores, and we'll look at the stores in a second, the actual facilities they're buying at. Hardware stores look good, pretty even, but we're still strong players with our stores in the overall market, but we've got to, again, look at online only, discount department stores, these competitors around us. What are they doing to get into our product categories? And what can we do? We're not going to stop it, but what can we do to make that an easier shot for us to regain that business or just cut it off? So how did they make their most recent purchases? Physical store. If you look at 2018 to 2020, it dropped 20%. Now certainly 2020 brings in the COVID impact of people being locked down and not shopping. But I think another important trend indicator is if we look at the orange line, if you can see the orange line, in 2018 it was 16%, it's now up to 21%. That's not going to go away. A real smart person I know, he's sharing this session with me, said he had never ever bought food online and had it delivered, and then they did, and he's asking himself, why haven't I done this? It's so easy. Well, just think of that happening millions and millions and millions of times across the country. And as Dan alluded to earlier, this trend isn't going to change. They've drank the Kool-Aid. They bought the drug. It's easy. They like it. It's convenient. It's giving them more time. It's just not going to change, and we've got to be prepared for that. By the generations again, how are they buying it? It's certainly indicative of the boomers and the matures, and I won't tell you which one I fall into, but you can probably gather from my gray hair. The physical store, again, is still real important. And there's an underlying story here too that I'll hit on in a second. But as we move into online, you're seeing the younger generations, again, maybe being a little bit repetitive, but they are online oriented. You know, it's not that they don't like to go to stores, and it's not that they're not going to stores, but they're only going to the stores half the time that the matures are or that the boomers are. If we look at it by male and female, females, and hopefully my wife never sees this particular session, you know, they love to go to stores. I mean, that's pastime, that's entertainment for them. Even in times of pandemic, you know, put on the mask, you know, gloves, and away we go. But we still see online growing, and that is very, very important. Further down the path on how categories are being purchased, we need to look at it by category because it's quite revealing that it's not just an overall situation of where products, categories are being purchased, but certainly all of them have a strong physical in-store purchasing, but we see again that the online is moving up, and purchased online, picked up in store is also going up. And I'm not going to go through all of these, and we'll have obviously have the deck available, and you can study these at your leisure. In fact, if you're not able to sleep some night, pull them out and take a look at them. It'll put you right to sleep, I assure you. But we can see this fundamental shift in where consumers are buying our products. And certainly a lot of this has been brought about because of the pandemic and being stuck at home, but this is going to be what we call a permanent change. So, future forward, where are we going from here? This is a quote we've used for years. For those of you who've heard me speak, you know I use it a lot. The future always arrives a little before we're ready to give up the present. And that is very, very appropriate here because things are just kind of rolling along, and all of a sudden the pandemic comes in and, you know, shifts us around. But there are certain things that we have to do to take care of being in the present we just didn't think about yesterday or maybe even today. So in planning for the future, what can we count on? Well, first of all, channel growth will continue. There is no sign that we see, and you can talk to all the other experts, that says that our market's going to go to hell in a handbasket, but the fundamentals are so strong. You know, there's positive household formation, there's people who want homes, there's people who are stuck there. The home has never been more important than it is today. It's not just a home, it's an office, it's a schoolroom. It has to be adapted for those, and if for no other reason being important is people are saying, I'm stuck here, I don't like it, it's time to paint those walls. Now I know Dan hasn't painted his yet, but he's about to, I think. Customer habits have permanently changed. There's no way you're going to get people to go back and shop the way they used to when they have other options that now they've learned how to use and have become comfortable with. You know, always we're worried about the seniors and the baby boomers, and you know they're not going to be as technologically advanced as the boomers or the Xers and the Ys and the Zs. Well, they've had to become that way, and they like it. One of the things they like about it is that they can check prices and not leave their lazy boy. Customers will continue to be hypersensitive to a safe experience, even post-vaccine. And I think this is going to be a major factor. There's two implications here. One, on the tactical side, you're going to have to continue to ensure their safety at the store level. They cannot walk into your store and feel like people don't have masks on, there's not spacing, they're not protected. And even with the vaccine, and when the pandemic is supposedly over, you know, this is not going to go away easy. So we've got to be cognizant of this, but also too, when we have to sit down as a consumer and ask the question, do I really want to go to that store today, or can I just, you know, get on computer and buy it online and have it on my doorstep tomorrow morning, or maybe this afternoon? that's how they're going to go. So we've got to be aware of that. So what do we do? What are the critical issues? I think you need to recognize that your customers have changed and find out how. We always talk about local market information. There's great generalities being said and made about the industry and what you need to do. And every expert I know has a solution to every situation. But their customer's right. You need to find out. You need to find out how they've changed, because we know they have changed. And there's two types of change that you need to deal with. One are your existing customers. How have they changed? Oh, they've always come to my store. They'll always come back to my store. Yeah, but are they buying online, and where else are they buying online? And is your online performance up to what they expect? And then new customers. One of the interesting things that happened during the pandemic is that so many stores that I've talked with say, well, we're seeing a lot of new customers that we've never seen before. Or better yet, we've seen people that haven't been in our store in years. Well, the challenge is, how do you keep them? These new customers, or new old customers, what do they want? How are you going to keep them coming in the store? So the big thing is understanding, again, and obviously we've been studying consumer behavior for 40, 50 years. So you got to do that. The other thing is, it's finally time, put on your big boy pants and realize you have to reallocate strategic planning time for planning your digital future. What's your e-commerce going to be about? It usually takes, back burner, second fiddle. It's never in the forefront of people's planning, and it has to be. It's every bit as important as that new truck you need to buy. It may be a little bit more, but you need to figure it out, because it impacts everything, near every part of the retail mix, from communicating with the customer, to getting them into the store if they're coming in the store, to selling them online, to helping them pick it up in store or delivering to them. And then last, but certainly not least, is you've got to operate at best of class on what I'll call the traditional customer satisfaction priorities, while you're adapting to the new customer demands. We can't just stop being great at service in the store. We can't just stop being in stock. We can't just stop the things that we've grown to be known for in our market. What are your core competencies? What do your customers think? What do the new customers think? But at the same time, too, we've got to make sure we're still focused on those and being the best of those as we possibly can, while we embark on this new era of demands that these new customers are going to have, which 9 times out of 10 is going to revolve around e-commerce and the digital world that we live in. So I'll close with a quote. No, this isn't a picture of me when I got up this morning, but at least hopefully when I get to be his age, I'll still have hair. Albert Einstein said, "I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination." And so true are those words today. The winds of the pandemic cannot be changed. They are what they are. The winds of how consumers have changed their behavior, how they want to shop, where they're going to shop, how they purchase, what they purchase has changed. So it's time to set your sails to reach that destination, and the destination is satisfied customers and growth in your marketplace. I'll turn it back to Dan if that's what I'm supposed to do.
Hey, thank you very much, Jim. And I really, truly appreciate the statement up front that you and I have actually never been convicted of a crime, though we may be partners in crime. But there's still a lot of things that are out there that are pending. But thank you so much for providing your insights, as always. And again, a plug for our friends at the Farnsworth Group, and Jim's email and farnsworthgroup.com would be where you could learn more about what the Farnsworth Group does, and also learn how they could really help you with your business analytics and your decision-making process through the research they do. And you don't have to work with Jim if you don't want to. They have other very competent people there. All kidding aside, I also wanted to give a big thank you once again to our sponsor, Epicor. We appreciate their support, and sponsorship of companies like Epicor helps us continue to conduct the kind of research we conduct and to share these insights and information with the industry. And we know that certainly for Epicor, this kind of relationship isn't just about getting their name out there, it's also about supporting the industry. So we truly appreciate their support for our strategic webinar series going into 2021. We thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and both of our presentation decks are available for you to download. And with that, we are open to questions, but we'd also like to close by wishing you all a very safe and healthy holiday season, and thank you all for your support of NHPA, and wish you a very healthy and prosperous 2021. Thank you.